Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. So today I'm delighted to be joined by Alice, all the way from Florida. So we're 3,000 miles away, or about 18 inches screen to screen. Welcome to the show. Welcome to the show, Alice.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very pleased to be here and honored.
I'm honored that you joined in. So yeah, we're both honored. Isn't that great? What if we could all be more honored to be having conversation?
Yeah. And everybody could get along. That would be great.
Yeah. There's not a lot of getting along, is there? There should be a bit more getting along. Everybody talks about gratitude, don't they? And I don't know, resilience and kindness. What if we could all just get along a bit better? So could you introduce yourself to the listeners, please, Alice?
I certainly will. My name is Alice Murray, and as Simon said, I live in Florida in the United States. I have been an adoption attorney for over 30 years. I started in 1989. I can't believe it's been that long ago. Of course, I was only 12 then because I'm still so young. I've been blessed by adoption in several ways. I mean, one is a wonderful career. I absolutely love doing adoption work for the law because most of the time you think of the law, people are fighting over things, not getting along, like you owe me money or you did this to me. And with adoption, if it's done correctly, it's a win for everybody. You know, an adoptive couple has this miracle of being able to parent. A child has a stable and loving two-parent home, and a birth parent that's not in a position to parent has the peace of mind that they have done what a parent is supposed to do and provide for their child. So it's a win-win-win. I love it. And then personally, I have two adopted family members. My sister and her husband were not able to have children, and they have adopted two children. I have a niece and a nephew who are both adopted, and I couldn't love them any more than if my sister had given birth to them. They are my family.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter if we have the same blood. And I'd love to write about adoption too. Writing is a passion of mine, so I've written a number of articles on adoption too.
Great.
So that's me.
So you said that you'd started working when you were about 11. I was going to say about 8.
Yes, I get younger every year. I just can't believe it's been that long. I have children, well, babies. I do infant placements really, and I have babies that I placed years ago that are now parents themselves, and I'm like, how did this happen? They were just a baby the last time I saw them.
So you're still in touch with some of these?
Oh yes, oh yes. I am on Facebook. So if anybody wants to look me up, Alice Hale Murray. I'm on Facebook, and I have a number of birth mothers and adoptees and adoptive parents that are friends of mine, and we're still connected. So I get to see the rest of the story.
Yeah.
I mean, adoption doesn't end when you place a child with a family. That's just the beginning of their life with that family. So it's wonderful to see, you know, graduation pictures and when they get married, or, you know, we have one adoptee that's really big in sports and got named to a national team. So yes, it's wonderful to keep up and see that they're doing well and thriving.
Yeah. So not many attorneys do that, you know. I'm thinking, talking about not getting on. You know, I'm thinking about Harry and Meghan. And Meghan used to be in a law show called Suits, which was all about lies and one-upmanship, and smart suits. And I wonder how many of those lawyers are still in touch with their clients those years on, and I wouldn't imagine there's many.
Right. And when you do that type of work, when it's about money, it doesn't touch you personally, so you don't care. But you cannot do an adoption. It's such a personal thing. You've got to have some kind of connection with all the people that are involved. So of course you want to, this is a life or lives that you've touched, and you want to know, how has this turned out? Has this been a good experience for everybody? Hopefully, yes, but I know sometimes there are things that go wrong.
So you're changing my perception of lawyers. I have not been a fan of lawyers, and especially as depicted in some of the media. I've not been and I think I've bought into that. So an
Well,
adoptee with a
that,
heart.
that's how most people view lawyers. And it's funny because I actually had to go in for some surgery and I'm lying there getting ready to go in the operating room. And the anesthesiology person comes up to me and goes, "So you're a lawyer?" I'm like, "How did they know that? I'm here in a hospital gown. I haven't told anybody." And she turns around my chart and they had this big neon post-it on there that said, "She's a lawyer. Like, beware, she might sue you if you do something wrong." And I thought, I do adoption work. I love nurses. My son's a nurse. I'm not here to cause trouble. I do stuff that's, heartwarming. But that's the perception that people have, that attorneys are heartless and they're ready to sue anybody at a moment's notice.
Mm.
So I'm glad to not be in that mold.
Yeah. Yeah, there's slight difference. One of the differences between American culture and British culture is you're a little bit more litigious, but we're getting a little bit more like that too, I think. So
Yes.
it's good. It's lovely to meet a lawyer with a heart. So you said the word thrive. It's the Thriving Adoptees podcast. What are the in 30 years in this field, and then the personal experience too? What have you seen about well, first off, what do you mean by thriving?
Well, of course, we live in an imperfect world, so no one's ever going to have a perfect life. But you want somebody to be grounded. As a parent myself, I want to be able to raise a child that's got a good foundation, that's felt loved, somebody supporting them. So that's what I would want for any adoptee. The same thing as with a biological child. You need a supportive family. You need somebody that's behind you and cheering for you and supporting you, that you feel loved and appreciated. And you've got help when you need it, someone you can go to, someone that cares about you. And I think everybody deserves that as a human. That's one reason I think it's so sad people don't get along today, because it hurts you when people are being ugly or mean to one another. And especially in the home, that's so important for a child to know that they're unconditionally loved by whoever is raising them.
Yeah. So the key word you started off with there was grounded. I mean, this is what does that mean? Because it's one of those words that it makes kind of like intuitively it feels right for me. It kind of logically it makes a lot of sense. But what is it that you mean by that?
Well, grounded is you always feel like you have a place. There's a saying, I don't know if they say it in Britain, but home is where the heart is. So no matter where you go, you know that there are people out there that love you and that are supporting you and are behind you. So, for example, my son lives in California. He's a nurse. So he's all the way across the country from me. I haven't seen him since last January. I mean, we talk frequently on the phone, but he's grounded. He knows I'm here. He was having a hard time with something. He just picked up the phone. He called me. It was the middle of business day. And he said, "I'm sorry, Mom, but you said that I could call you anytime, and I'm having a tough time. I'm sick and I don't feel well." That's what you want. You know that there's somebody always there for you, and you have that support, and you feel comfortable that you've been given the tools and resources to face the world, and there's always somebody there behind you.
Yeah. Yeah, and as you say, this is kind of human stuff. It's not adoption stuff. I guess the feeling is sometimes there's that insecurity. If the opposite of grounded, well, if we mean grounded, we mean connected. The opposite of connected is disconnected. The opposite of grounded may be insecurity. So, what have you got to what have you got to share? What have you seen in what helps foster that? Yeah, I mean, by fostering. I don't mean fostering as an adoption fostering. I mean in terms of what have you learned that helps adopted kiddos feel that security? What have you
Well, I think it's good for everybody to understand, and it's the perspective. And I have run across so many negative perspectives of adoption, whether it's said to an adoptee or hopefully not, but especially to birth parents. You know, the perspective of adoption is, why are you giving away your child? It's like you're abandoning your child. And I always try to stress to birth mothers, you're not abandoning your child. You are showing the most love that you can do. You recognize, for whatever reason, whether it's financial, medical, whatever, you personally can't provide for that child. So you're doing a very unselfish thing and finding a wonderful home for your child. You're not abandoning your child. You're actively making a plan so this child can have a good life. And I think a lot of adoptees, I'm not a psychologist, so this is just my on the job training for 30 years. I think a lot of adoptees and birth mothers are afraid, the child is going to feel unloved because they're not with the parent. So let me tell you this story. I'll try and do it without crying because every time I hear it, I cry. But I work with another attorney, and he's done this work about 4 or 5 years longer than I have. And one of the very first adoptions he did, he got a call 18 years later, and it was the adoptee. And he said, Mr. Harrell, I want to know if I can find my birth mother. And Rob's like, okay, well, what's going on? And he says, I want to thank her. I never recognized this until last night. And he said, I just graduated from high school. I'm going to college. I have an academic scholarship. I've had a stay at home mom that loves me. I've had an involved dad. He coached my soccer team. I have just had this wonderful life, and I just felt I should thank my parents. And I went out and told them how much I appreciated what they'd done. And he said, and then I went back and sat on my bed, and it kind of struck me like a lightning bolt. He said, the person I really need to thank is my birth mother. Because 18 years ago, when she had me, she was sitting in a hospital bed, and her heart was breaking because she wasn't going to be able to be with her child. And she was probably crying when she signed that consent. But when she did, what she really did was take my life and wrap it up into a beautiful present and hand it to me. And the life I have now and the wonderful future I have is all because of her unselfish act. She loved me so much. So if people would get the perspective, it's not that the child is unloved, it's quite the opposite. They love you so much that they are doing something that's heartbreaking, not being with their own child, but because they want the best for their child. So it's all a matter of perspective. So if we could change people's perspective about what the Adoption Act is.
Okay. So there's so much in there. There's so much in there, and I'll add a little bit of my take on that, if I may.
Sure.
So what happened to that young man is important because it happened to him. It was an insight that he had. It hit him like a lightning bolt. So I've had that, a very similar experience to that, as in my birth mother's love for me hit me like a lightning bolt as well. When I was reading a letter that she never thought I was going to see, it was a letter to the agency. I've talked about it before, but essentially, I got that hold of that letter when I got my adoption file when I was 48, and I could feel her love, and I also could feel a desperation. Actually, I could feel a desperation about having to have me adopted. And this, so this is all about, the other word that you used was perspective. So we have to, as humans, most of us don't think that we're good enough, right? we're not good enough. In you know, and it has a million. It's an ice cream with a million different. Not good enough is an ice cream with a million different flavors. But essentially, that's it. You know, and then when that not good enough gets bigger, that feeling gets bigger. It can become shame. It's you know, its co-pilot is insecurity. But we all feel that, and therefore, as for adoptive parents listening, the ultimate thing for your child to see for themselves, I am underlining that and repeating that, is that they are good enough. They are perfect. They are loved. They are wanted. Now, they have to see that for themselves. Yes. So your job as an adoptive parent is to help your child, teen, adoptee see that for themselves. And every child is going to need to, and the earlier they can see that, the better. The earlier they can see that, the better. So I saw that. I started seeing that around 40, and I got different glimpses. I got different glimpses of that, of that perfection, and in fact, all of our perfection over the years, and then it's like a piece, like a perfection jigsaw. And the letter from my birth mother when I was 48, so that's 6 years ago, that was you know, another big piece of the perfection jigsaw. So that's the ultimate. You know, that sums up. You know, you said that they feel grounded, they feel love, they feel supported, they know you're behind you, they're cheering for you, they're unconditionally there. And I think that's all about how they feel. And the essential part is how they see themselves, the meaning that they give, on the meaning that they, well, yeah. At one level, it's about the meaning that they give to adoption. And at a deeper level, it's how they see themselves. So so what we don't want to see them as is this kind of broken or rejected or spurned. What they've got to see is their perfection. And how you do that, well, that's the art.
Well, I have two suggestions. One, I try to do it. Doesn't work in every case because, you know, somebody has to be willing to do it. But I encourage birth mothers to write a letter to the child that the child can have later on when they're older and they're able to read it, explaining the reason for doing this. Because if you don't have an explanation, you come up with all these ideas in your head, and a lot of them may be negative, or people will be telling you negative things. Your mom abandoned you, she didn't want you. And especially when you're a teen, you've got so much turmoil trying to figure out who you are, whether you're adopted or not. So I always encourage the birth mothers, sit down when you can. And I think getting their emotions out helps them too, because they can see, I really am doing this for my child. I love my child. So you can tell an adoptee all day long, your mom loved you, she did this for the best. But it's a different impact when you read your mom's own words where she says, I loved you so much that I had to do this. I couldn't give you the life you deserved, or I wasn't in a position because of health reasons or whatever. And it's so much more impactful when you read it in their own words. So that's number one. I think mom not only make the placement, but you need to prepare the child for dealing with the rest of his life and the position he or she is going to be in as an adoptee. You need to present it as this is a positive thing. This is a positive image, and it is an outgrowth of my love for you. And hearing it from mom is the very best way to do it. Second thing is I think the adoptive parents have a responsibility to put adoption in the right perspective for the adoptee. And one of my biggest concerns right now is some adoptive parents don't want to share with an adoptee that they're adopted. Well, if adoption's so wonderful, why are you not sharing this information with your child? So when you don't share it, it's a secret and people think of it as negative. And if the child finds out way later on in life, oh, I'm adopted, they've got lots of issues to deal with. First of all, my mom didn't want me. Second of all, I can't trust anybody. My own parents, the people that are closest to you in the world and have raised you, they've been lying to me my whole life. They haven't told me I was adopted. And studies have been done. And the later that an adoptee finds out in his life that he's adopted, the more distressing and the more negative impacts that it has. Actually mental health issues, depression, anxiety, trust issues. So I think the parents, adoptive parents, have an obligation. Give your child that foundation by starting out at the very beginning and letting them know you are a chosen child to be in our family. So it's all how you explain it to the child. We had a secretary that worked here years ago, and she and her husband adopted a little boy. And from the time he was little bitty, they explained to him, of all the children in the world we could have had in our family, we specifically chose you. And that, they explained it in age appropriate, but he knew he was chosen and brought into the family. And he had a very high, view of himself. He felt good about himself. And he went to school and told all his friends he was adopted. And the parents get a call from the principal. And the principal says, your son's going around telling everybody he's better than they are because their parents had to have them, but he was chosen to be in his family. So again, it's all a matter of perspective. I mean, if adoption's wonderful, we shouldn't be keeping it a secret. We should talk about it. We should explain it and put it in the right perspective.
Yeah. And it's because every child is different, every parent is different, every family is different. This is there is no 1, 2, 3, 5 steps
right.
to getting your child to see their perfection. If there was, I'd give you one. I'd give you the steps. I'd share the steps with you, dear listener. I'm just underlining this because I know that the parents listening are curious and they're looking for the difference that makes the difference. And the difference that makes the difference is your child seeing their perfection. That's it. Not perfection in a big-headed way, but perfection as in we're all perfection. Underneath some of the poop, some of us have been through poop in our life. Some of us have poopy thoughts. Some of us feel like poop. But underneath all that is my favorite metaphor for this is the diamond hidden in the poop, and the fact that we're all unique diamonds, as unique as snowflakes are, and your job is helping your child see that the perfection in themselves, and the better that you can see that in yourself, the better able you're going to be able to point it out to your child, and the better you're going to be able to model. You want to be that you want to be the parent. You want to be what you want your child to be.
I think one of the things that people need to help adoptees do is get rid of that lie that says you're unwanted, because the truth is the total opposite. Not only were you not unwanted, you're loved more than the average person. And I try to explain that. Look, you've got a birth parent that loved this child so much that they did some unselfish act and had to be separated from the child to make sure that the child was okay. That is great love. And then you have this adoptive couple that raises this child and loves this child. This child has more people loving him or her than the average person that just has two biological parents. So I think it's the lie that's going on in the adoptee's brain. I'm unwanted. I'm unloved. No, you are loved more. You are blessed. You have more people that have loved you in your life in a deep and unselfish way than the average person does. So we've got to get our thinking straight.
Yeah. So an idea has come to me in terms of like a practical thing here, because I know that people love practical solutions here. So one of the things that we can do, vulnerability has great power. So one of the things that we can do as any human being is share what the voice in our heads tells us about us. And then how we've realized that that's not true. So that way we're giving the child or the teenager, we're giving them the permission to ignore the negative voice in their head.
Yes.
And we're leading. As a parent, you're a leader. And leaders need to go first. And that means for me daring to be vulnerable about the fact, that what's going through our head isn't necessarily the truth.
That's right.
We got to go first.
Right. And you need to talk to your child. I mean, parents are always told you need to talk to your child. Don't do drugs. Don't do this. You need to, well, you need to, if adoption's in the picture, you need to have conversations. Don't shove it in the corner. I mean, address it full on. Because if the parent doesn't talk about it, then the child may think, well, gosh, that's a negative thing, or it's hush hush, or we shouldn't talk about it. So you need to be open and be willing to discuss it and put it in the proper perspective. Because if you don't talk about it, the child deems it, well, that's not important or significant because they're not talking about it. They tell me not to do drugs. They tell me to do my homework, but we don't ever talk about adoption. So it's important that the child feels comfortable discussing it, or has a question they can ask the parent.
Yeah. And one of the things that we can do with this is we can kind of normalize it. So there's lots of books out there that we can use, like fiction books, that we can use to talk about how adoptees think and feel without having to, if our child's more sensitive to this, doesn't want to open up, then we can make it about the character in the book or a character in a film. And I'm gonna give him a little shout out, actually. So a fellow, what do you call people that live in Florida? Floridian?
Is that Floridian?
Is that Floridian?
That's a thing.
That's a thing. Okay.
I'm a Floridian.
There's a great guy called Darren Fink, who's a fellow Floridian, and we did a podcast with him. So he's an adoptive parent, runs a nonprofit called Transfiguring Adoption, and his episode is all about indirect ways to start a conversation about adoption with your child by talking about, the stuff that characters in films, books, and video games have gone through. So we go around about, we use those like a little Trojan horse to address the issue in a roundabout way, where in the past, perhaps we've tried to go somewhere like this and it's felt a little bit tricky and the child hasn't responded. So this is all about the million different ways that you can get your child to see that perfection, and it's a creative journey where parents come to adoption through infertility. They've jumped through lots of hoops, they've kept going, they've ended up adopting. Now this is another phase of that, where that persistence that you showed to become an adopted parent is going to be tested again in a way, in your ability to talk to your child about that, so that they can see their perfection underneath the voice in their head. We've all got that voice in our head that tells us we're not good enough. It's and I say, it's just so that just happens to be the case that as adoptees, we've got a really compelling reason to believe that voice in our head that says we're not good enough. But just because we believe that we've got this compelling reason, it doesn't make it the truth. And the art is helping our child see the truth of who they are, and that ultimate, I keep on using this word, perfection, and that's the journey.
Right. Well, every person is unique and everybody's got their own story, and you don't have to be like everybody else. And in fact, what has brought you to where you are, that makes you who you are. So embrace it, not. And as far as adoptive parents, I think I think you're right. Preparation is the key. If you're going to talk about something with your child, you need to understand it first yourself before you can convey it. And there's so many resources that are out there. Now, every child is different. You're going to know your own child the best. But I mean, you're not alone. I mean, there's resources on the internet. There's people that you can talk to that have been through this and can share their experiences and what worked with them. But I mean, it's going to take some effort, but you take your child to soccer practice, or, take them to make them practice the piano. So you have to put work into it. It's not just going to happen, but it's so worth it to make sure your child's okay.
Yeah. And this is it's not a once and forever thing.
No.
Well, it's not once and done. So when you write about adoption, Alice, do you write about these things? What is it? What is it most? What do you love writing about? What do adoptive parents learn from what you write about? Because I've been banging on about this perfection thing for at least 10 minutes, trying to change the track.
Well, I write about anything and everything. I think it's just good to tell people what it's really like. Because if you look on the media, if you read about adoption or watch a TV movie, it's not like that. It rarely is how it really is. So I want people to understand what's it really like. What do you need to know up front? What's the process like? What are some issues? What should you do once the child is in the home? So I want to educate people, because I think education is key, because the misconceptions people have about adoption are just, it's crazy.
Yeah.
I had a birth mother that came in to talk about placing a child for adoption. And she said, well, I really think this is what's best. I'm just not in any position. I've basically been living out of my car or in friends' houses, and I can't even take care of myself. And that's not a life for a child. And she said, but my dad is adamantly opposed to it. He had a horrible time when he was adopted. He knows nothing about his parents. He was just ripped away from his mom at the hospital. It was a horrible experience for everybody. And I'm like, that's not how adoption is today. Adoption has changed over the years. People recognize now, you just don't take the child from the mom and then just send her home. And the child's, you don't just place the child in the home and then that's the end of it. I mean, this is an ongoing process. Mom's got a process of what she's doing, how she's feeling, what impact her decision has had on her and her family. The child's going to have to be, you know, you have to explain adoption to them and how do you maneuver through that. But the more you know about it, so here was a birth mother that felt pressured not to place her child for adoption because she didn't want she didn't want that rift with her dad. But her dad didn't understand how adoption was in today's world. I mean, it was totally different years and years ago.
Yeah.
So,
What other myths do you what are myths do you come across that adoptive parents buy into?
I think they're afraid that if they tell, this one really is heavy on my heart. If they tell the child that they're adopted, that it's really going to upset the child. So they're trying to protect the child. And in reality, you're not protecting the child. You're just setting the child up for a bigger fall later. I had a phone call, it's probably been a couple months ago now, and the lady said, I don't know if you remember me. You placed a baby with me and my husband 22 years ago. I'm like, well, I vaguely remembered the name. And she goes, well, he's going to be 22 this month. And do you think we should tell him now that he's adopted? And I'm thinking, oh my word. He's a man now. He's an adult. He's 22 and he has no clue that he is adopted. How would you feel if all of a sudden the rug is ripped out from under you? Everything that you'd ever thought about your life is not true. I mean, you thought this was mom, this was dad, everything was wonderful, and now what? You've lied to me. You haven't told me this story. So, of course, telling the story is going to evoke different emotions, and there may be some confusion or upset because, oh, my mom was in a difficult position. But it's the lesser of two evils because not telling the child, that's their story. They deserve to know that. And they deserve to be told at an appropriate time so they understand that that's what it is. It was something wonderful. It was an act of love on the parents' part. And don't set them up for something horrible. I had another situation. I didn't handle the adoption, but a friend of mine had a coworker who was in her mid 30s and she was having health issues. And so she kept asking her mom, well, what's the family history on this, that the doctor needs to know? And the mom was kind of being real evasive and wouldn't answer. So the woman said, oh, I'm just going to do a DNA test and see what medical information is back in the family. And when she gets this report back, it shows where some relatives are. It says, oh, the mom's in Ohio. Well, this lady lived in Florida, and so did her mother. And she's like, what? And then she goes to her mom, and her mom's like, oh, yes, you're adopted. Wait, why? First of all, it's not good for the child. Second of all, the secret's going to come out this day and age with DNA testing. Somebody's bound to find out something at some time. And how do you want it? How would you want your child to find out? Do you really want them to find out by reading a DNA report or, somebody spilling the beans? I mean, you need to present this. That's your responsibility to tell your child their story. Yeah. So I feel very, very, deeply that, and I always explain to parents, you need to tell your child that they're adopted. That's not a bad thing. It's not negative. It's a positive. It's their story and they need to know it. But, either they're afraid of how the child's going to react or thinking they're protecting the child. But that is a myth. Yeah. That is a myth. Yeah.
So the other myth that comes to my mind is that stuff that you've talked about before in terms of the negative portrayal in the media, and also in terms of negativity, this kind of trauma obsession. So one of my little taglines at the moment, let's be trauma informed but hope obsessed.
Exactly.
Because there's a lot of adoptees out there. I was talking to a fellow adoptee last week, and she said she was talking about it, and she said they're trauma dumping. there's a lot of trauma dumping out there. So I think when adoptive parents can see that trauma dumping, that can cause them some anxiety and some worries about the future. And we've got a social media and a media that is negative. Well, good news isn't news, is it? Bad news. Bad news.
Everybody wants bad news.
Yeah. And in terms of like our friends at Facebook, they've worked out that the fastest stuff. Sorry, one of the biggest determinants of content and posts being shared on Facebook is its ability to incite anger. Exactly. So polarizing content for either way. Ideally, they want content that is going to polarize between big people in front of it, big people for it, and big people against it, and then it gets spread, and it gets spread. And the more people, so most people don't get this. A lot of people are getting it. Facebook's model is driven by advertising. So the more pages are viewed on Facebook, the more money Facebook makes, because the more times that it can show its adverts to the people on Facebook. So they want stuff that spreads anger, like adoption stories, and any sort of negativity, and so that kind of, why did this birth mother give the baby away? That kind of, that kind of vibe. Facebook wants you to share that. So it's going to spread that. It spreads that stuff. It spreads negativity. It does stuff to incite anger, because that's their business model as a company that's quoted on the stock exchange. They want, their ultimate bottom line is to their shareholders. And that's why they have such negative comments, to create anger. And that's another myth, but that's a business model myth. But if we buy into all that, it doesn't really set us up for our kids to thrive if we're buying into this less than true news and biased opinion.
The media focuses on very negative things and very controversial and sensational things. And in every walk of life, there's going to be somebody that does something that they shouldn't do. And adoption is no exception. There are people out there that, abuse their adopted child, or someone's selling their baby. I mean, I've been called a baby seller, by people. Like, you're just taking babies and selling them to people. No, that's not what it is. But you see things in the media about that. Adoptive parents are just out there buying babies, and moms are selling babies, and, the kids are getting abused. And again, there's always going to be somebody that does something wrong, but I think that's the view everybody has, is an extremely negative view of adoption, because all they ever see are the bad stories, except maybe during the Olympics. If there's an adopted Olympian, they always have the heartwarming story about the Olympian that's adopted. But otherwise, you read and it's the very negative things, and we need to quit that. I mean, yes, we should focus. We should make sure that negative things don't happen, and things that happen like that should be uncovered and exposed and taken care of. But we don't want everybody to think that's all what it is. But how's an adoptee going to feel when all they read is, adoption's just baby selling? I'm a commodity? No.
Yeah. That's a conversation to have with your kids. The thing I'm touch on briefly is this idea that, adoption. Our trauma is who we are, and it's adoption is something that happened to us. It's something that and our trauma is something. It's that anger or those negative thoughts, what we've been through. but that's not who we are, you know, underneath all those layers, underneath. So I always talk about this in terms of behavior is driven by feelings, is driven by thoughts,
Exactly.
is driven by identity. And we tend to, as a society, I think we tend to, in all things, we focus on behavior, you know, strategies, things to do, parenting techniques. It's all in this. It's all in this behavior piece, or our kids' behavior. We're focused on our kids' behavior. But the biggest thing that we can do is help our kids. I mean, and everybody can understand that. What we do is driven by how we feel. How we feel is determined by what we think, and what we think is determined by our self-concept, our idea of ourselves, that opinion of who we are. And that's why I bang on about the perfection bit, because if we think there's something wrong with us, then we're going to have that thought running through our head. What's wrong with me? And those questions going round in head, that negative voice, that's going to lead to the feeling of insecure. That's going to lead to acting out, or the behaviors like shutting ourselves away in the room. And if we can explain to kids that process, to empower kids to understand what's driving, you know, why are they doing the things that they're doing, and focus on the perfection that they are, and that kind of like that self-identity, that's where the ultimate leverage is. And we've got to go upstream, we've got to go right upstream and go to that identity, rather than focusing downstream, trying to change the behaviors, because it ain't going to work.
I think another wrong thought that people have, and it's media driven. I see, and it just irks me when I read it. It's like, well, you know, they're not the real parents of the child. These labels that people put on, you're the adoptive parent, so you're not the real parent. Like, everybody's a real parent in one way or another. Why do we need to get into these labels? If you carried and gave birth to a child, you're a parent. If you nurture and raise a child and you're there when the child's sick and you take the child, you're a parent. Why do we need to get into the real? And I think that gets to thinking like, oh, something's wrong. I'm not with my real parent, you know, and that feeds a negative thought in the adoptee. I'm not at where I should be. I'm not with my real parent. Yeah. And then they feel all this anxiety and negativity about the situation they're in because they feel like they've been robbed. They're not with their real parent. And I just do not like that thinking. Everybody's a real parent and everybody loved you.
Yeah. So this has been fantastic, Alice. Is there anything else that you'd like to share before we bring this in?
Well, I would just encourage people, if you've had a positive experience with adoption, I mean, voice it, because again, there's so much negativity out there and we tend to focus on the negative things. So I think people should be willing to share that they've had a positive adoption experience, whether it's as a birth parent, as an adoptive parent, or even as an adoptee, because I think the perception needs to be changed. And if the public perception of adoption is better, I think that's going to take some pressure off the adoptee of feeling negative about being labeled an adoptee.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I just want to there's a podcast in the back catalogue. I can't remember the name of it, but I think that would be really useful in view of what you just said. I also think, you know, this sharing this story, if it's appropriate for you, it's a project that the family could get behind. So let me see if I can find the story. I'm just flicking back. I'm just flicking back. Where am I? I want to be. Oh yeah. So it's called Bouncing Back and moving forward. And I'm going to put while I say this, there's no need to take a note of that, guys, or try and pull over. Well, if you're driving or whatever, I'll put a link in the show notes. So there's a previous episode about some Californians, Jenny and Cesar Para. And I always pronounce the names wrong. But they're out there on social media with as kind of like what do people call them, influencers. But most influencers are pretty cheesy. These guys are really genuine, and they share their story on that, and then there's linked to that. They call it Our Family Vine. And what about making what you do, if it's appropriate, as I say, as like a little family project that you can do, and you can work together on it. Because, as we've said, there's too much negative press around adoption. So why don't we temper that with some more positive stories? And that's a very positive note to finish on. So, Alice, thank you very much for your time. It's been great chatting.
It's been great chatting. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And if you want to check out what Alice is doing, I'm going to put up some links, obviously, to her website and to, you mentioned your Facebook. We'll put a link to your Facebook in the show notes, and you can check out and read more about read some of Alice's writing. Why don't I've been calling you Alice all the way through, and then I changed your name to Alex an hour in. It's nuts.
Must be getting tired.
I hope not. I've got another three conversations to have today.
Oh no.
Great to see you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.